I think sometimes BYU will be the highest bidder. I think the point of it was that he doesn't want BYU to just get into bidding wars.
Yeah, not
for
just
players,
selling
right?
cash, right? Yeah.
Exactly. I think that the approach should be, and this is probably the approach that Kevin Young has, that he'll go to a player and he'll say, "This is what we think you're worth."
Mm-hmm.
And essentially, like, this is the offer that you have. If you like it, great. If not, great. Like, we'll move on. Hello and welcome to the Aptive Podcast Studio. This is the Loyal Cougars Podcast, where we talk about what you, the fans, are talking about. I'm your host, Jake Edmonds, joined today by the football guru, Jeff Hansen from Cougar Sports Insider, as well as Give 'em Hell Brigham podcast and the Give 'em Hell Brigham website. Jeff, thanks for joining. How are you?
Doing well, man. Glad to be back. It feels like it was like when I came onto the show, that's when basketball kind of started to figure it out. So, like, I don't know that I was responsible for the turnaround, but I don't know that I wasn't either.
We can say that you were, and I appreciate you coming on because, again, you're the football guy, and so to get you to talk about basketball, I'm sure for you was a bit of a stretch, and you did a great job, and I enjoyed talking about basketball with you. But today we're going to talk heavy football because, as you know, basketball season's over. As everyone knows, basketball season's over. We're heading into football season. I did want to ask though, how was your weekend? Because it's funny. I went with my kids to the Minecraft movie.
Okay.
And I don't know if you know about the chicken jockey trend.
I've heard like you just start chucking food or something.
So yeah, I'm not a huge Minecraft expert.
Yeah.
And we're probably losing a lot of followers now because I'm talking about a video game. There's apparently because what you do is you craft things, right? In Minecraft, you mine and you craft. That's why they call it Minecraft. And you can craft like animals. And one of the animals you can craft is called a chicken jockey. And it's a very rare type of animal that you get when you put these materials together. And it's basically just a chicken with something on top of it, like a zombie or anything, like a pig or whatever. And it's a very rare animal. And so in the movie, it was this kind of shout out to a chicken jockey. But I don't know how the trend started, but kids, when that scene comes on, kids will just throw things all over. Like they'll buy popcorn from the movie theater. They'll bring in like toilet paper. I've seen like they'll throw drinks and water. I've seen people bring in fireworks into the show. Luckily for me, none of that happened. There was a little bit of shouting during that scene, but it was pretty tame in Saratoga Springs. But I did see in Provo that it was pretty wild, obviously with BYU fans and BYU students and college kids.
Those poor 17-year-old movie theater employees that have to walk in and like cleaning up a movie theater already sucks, but now you've got like soda and stuff everywhere. Like, man, that's brutal.
Yeah,
that's tough.
Cops came in some of these videos that I saw. Like, it was pretty intense. How was your weekend though?
A lot of 9-year-old baseball, which was great. They went 1-1 in the doubleheader. Didn't think they would, so that was good. And then just a lot of golf, man. Rory got it done. That felt great.
Yeah. Not a big golf fan. I actually didn't watch the Masters. I was with my kids. My kids also have sports. They had soccer, 2 soccer games on Saturday. So a little bit busy. And then Sunday took a nap. I just didn't watch any golf. But I want to talk about the kind of the news of the last weekend. And I kind of tricked you into joining the show today by saying we were going to talk primarily football or all football. We're actually going to start the show today with the news of the week last week, which really 2 parts to this. Yegor Demmin announcing that he's leaving. I don't think that was a huge surprise. I actually had Tosh McIntosh on last week, and the way that Yegor was kind of leading up to that announcement, it almost felt like he might stay. Obviously, he goes to general conference with his girlfriend, Delaney Gibb, who's a member of the women's basketball team. Delaney also announced that she was sticking around, that she was going to play another year at BYU. And so people thought, well, maybe that means Yegor is going to stay. And then the final thing was this kind of cryptic, and I'm sure you saw it, this cryptic social media post of saying all he needs is a pen and a paper and he'll sign. And I think BYU fans thought, maybe that means he'll sign with BYU. And then he announces this kind of press conference. He basically says, I'm going to announce what my next decision is,
right,
before he actually announced it. It was going to be on BYU TV. It was going to be on BYU basketball's social media account. So I think BYU fans coming into that scenario thought, well, why would Yegor, hype up this announcement if he's not going to be sharing good news with BYU fans? So there's a little bit of hope behind that. And, I wanted to get kind of your take because you understand kind of the mentality of these 18, 19-year-olds that are, they've never really had a PR team or a PR event in their life. This is kind of their first PR event. And so, I have my own take on why he did it. And I think it actually benefited, I think BYU in a way. And he kind of knew that going in, but what's kind of your take on college kids or high school kids, and making these sorts of announcements?
Well, I think that the biggest lesson that I think anybody who follows recruiting, I think, knows this to at least a certain extent. I think that the fact that it was a player on the roster kind of going through that, hat ceremony kind of feel, that was like what the process was, social media, little teasers. I learned a long time ago in the recruiting game, you don't try to guess, right? I mean, you say, Jake, I understand the thought process. I really don't. And that's, I think, what is important to understand is that each 17, 18, 19-year-old kid, they're all different. They all have different thought processes. They all have different motives. They have good ideas that make perfect sense in their head, and then it gets out into actual real life, and it's like, what are you doing? That just feels weird. So I stopped trying, as much as I can. Try not to read into any of that stuff because you really don't. They don't have PR professionals. They don't have any professionals. And honestly, what works on social media for an 18, 19-year-old kid that maybe goes viral, their audience in their mind are their friends, other 17, 18-year-old kids, 19-year-old kids. They're not thinking of the 45-year-old dude on the couch who's waiting to know what's happening. They're thinking of their friends. They see their friends use social media. Everything is on TikTok these days, right? So you just can't read that much into it, whether it's football, basketball, whether it's, Yegor Demon leaving the team or whether it's a recruit putting on a hat at the end of the day. All that social media stuff is just noise. Now there's AI and stuff that looks at it and they have some level of accuracy that they can predict based on social media behavior. Great. Good for that AI. I've covered recruiting. I think this is my 12th or 13th year now in recruiting. I have no clue. Every time I think I know what's happening based off of social media activity, I'm wrong. It changes. It's just so wild.
So that kind of leads down a path, right? Because you guys have your crystal ball, right? Mm-hmm. I think there's also these composites that you guys bring in with other recruiting sites. And, I'm sure every recruiting expert has their own method as far as how they crystal ball. Do you, when you crystal ball, are you pretty certain? Do you talk to the kid and they tell you, or do you talk to family members or, their inner circle? How confident are you when you crystal ball? Because you say you don't guess, or if you guess, you could easily be wrong. At what point are you pretty certain when you talk, when you do your crystal ball?
The dirty little secret that I've got, and hopefully there's no 24/7 sports bosses listening to this, I don't do crystal balls anymore. 7 or 8 years ago, it was like a prediction that I would have gone 6 months before Brock Harris's decision and said, okay, I've talked with Brock. I've talked with sources. I kind of know what's going on. I think he ends up at BYU. And it was kind of that prediction machine that maybe you weren't 100% accurate, but it was just kind of the I don't know, to show how well you knew the kid. And I think I generally was between 70 and 80%. But I tried not to move my crystal ball prediction after I put it in. I wanted one. It's sort of evolved now into the announcement before the announcement that generally speaking, yeah, you're either tipped off by whether it be sources in and around the programs, whether it be the high school program, the players or parents themselves. Generally speaking, I think those crystal balls, I think On3 does expert predictions. I think those kinds of things, it's that announcement before the announcement. And as that kind of evolved that way, I just don't like to do it. I give the kid their moment. I don't need to generate clicks that way. I can wait another 24 hours or whatever it is. But I think that you're right, Jake. I think generally speaking, that is kind of a tip-off of that's probably what's going to happen. I don't like to do it anymore. So I just don't do crystal balls, and we just don't really talk about it. And hopefully I never get in trouble for it.
I'll keep my lips sealed. It's always fascinating though to see how people get their information, and and it actually brings up kind of the Rob Wright situation because obviously the other piece of the news, big news last week, was Rob Wright signing for BYU, and it's crazy to think that when Yegor announced he was leaving, BYU had no point guards.
Mm-hmm.
They lost Dallin Hall, they lost Yegor, Trey Stewart's graduated, and I don't think there was a whole ton of panic among the staff, or at least among fans. I think we all kind of trusted Kevin Young. I don't think we expected him to sign. I think he's like the number 8 transfer in the portal this season. So you've already got AJ DeBonsa. You signed Rob Wright, who to me is I don't want to say upgrade from Yegor, because Yegor's got NBA potential. Like, I think Yegor is Yegor. We know his potential and how good he was at BYU, especially in the NCAA tournament. I think he was pivotal.
Yeah.
But I think Rob Wright's style of play matches what Kevin Young wants to do. And it also kind of fills in the gaps of what BYU needs in terms of, defensive production. BYU had one of the best offenses in the country, especially towards, the last 10, 11 games of the season. But they had one of the worst defenses, or at least middle of the pack defenses in the country. And if you're going to make it to the Final Four, if you're going to win a championship, you have to have a top 20 defense. Mm-hmm. And Yegor wasn't a bad defender per se, but Yegor's style of play was very finesse, and it was very, at least on offense, it was very much glide to the basket. I'm not really going to explode for a big dunk, or for even a big layup, or even, I'm not even really seeking contact. Mm-hmm. And he would still score in his kind of own finesse European way. Rob Wright is very much an agile, seeks contact, gets to the basket, finishes at the rim, very much like a Richie Saunders, but smaller, faster, probably a little more athletic, although Richie's pretty dang athletic. Mm-hmm. But I think Rob fits kind of that system a little bit better. But I did want to say the way that Rob, and he hasn't even officially signed as of today, Monday, the 14th. The way that it kind of came out, and the way that it seems like Baylor is presenting it, at least Baylor fans and Baylor reporters, is that Rob signed a contract with Baylor to stay in Waco. And it was like $1 million contract. And within a short period of time, he backed out, entered the transfer portal. And then all of a sudden BYU's offering him, reportedly $3 million or whatever, $3.5 million. And those numbers are disputed. I think it's kind of funny that BYU, Greg Wrubell and Spencer Linton both actively reported against that number, because those two are not incredibly vocal on social media, especially when it comes to BYU kind of inside information. Like they have a lot of inside information. I know they have access to players, coaches, admins. They tend to not share that stuff. So them sharing that felt very intentional. But, I was kind of curious what your take is on NIL, and we'll kind of get a little bit more into this with football, but NIL and having contracts and being able to get out of those contracts and entering a transfer portal, like what's your kind of take on NIL and how it affects players as entities or as assets rather than college students,
Yeah. I don't think it's good. I think that's the high level, like where we're at. I don't think that the current construct of what the NCAA is running is good. Now, I have not been shy about criticizing the NCAA throughout my life. I think they're, one of the least well-run organizations, of big organizations in the country. I think that they reap a lot of what they sow. So a lot of the chaos that we feel today, I think, is a direct byproduct of a lack of leadership at the NCAA level. However, when it comes to the NIL stuff and transfer portal stuff, especially things like the Rob Wright situation, or we're going to talk about Nico Yamaleava later on, right? I mean, you get into some of these situations. I don't know what the NCAA is supposed to do. When they've tried to have rules, they get sued into oblivion, and they can't have rules. They can't enforce anything. So I think what we've got here is kind of what fans wanted, right? We don't say that we want it. We don't admit that. But for a long time, it was really easy to be like, no, we're pro player. We want players to have more access. Coaches, Jay Billis is very quick to remind everybody anytime a coach takes a new job that, hey, the coaches transfer portal's always open, and nobody criticizes the coaches.
Yeah.
That's just not true. I mean, we do criticize coaches all the time. Darian DeVries got criticized a whole lot, right, when he left from West Virginia to go to Indiana, and it almost felt like, did he try to tank West Virginia's season at the end of the year so he could leave faster? You know, when Wade at McNeese State, when he jumps and is very transparent about it, talking about it in the middle of the tournament, he gets criticized for that too. So I think it's a misnomer to say coaches don't get criticized. So it's very similar now for players, and players have, like, you know, Rob Wright, whether he signed a contract, I don't know if he did or didn't at Baylor. That's kind of the other aspect of this, is because schools can't ever really come out and confirm anything because they are technically still sort of kind of separate from all the NIL activities. BYU can't really directly refute, you know, Rob Wright's not going to come out and be like, no, I never signed anything. So a school can leak whatever they want to some of their team reporters, and then that becomes fact very, very quickly. That's just kind of how it works. But I think this is exactly what me, myself, a lot of us kind of fought for, not knowing that this was going to be the result. We wanted players to have more freedom, more access, more, you know, maneuverability with their careers. It didn't feel fair that they had to sit out if they wanted to transfer. They should be paid, you know, all of these things. And yeah, you give a mouse a cookie, right? And here we are now today, and there are no rules. There are no barriers. The NCAA can't really enforce anything. When they try, they do. They end up in court and they lose. I think they're batting 0 in court right now. They never win any of those lawsuits. Mm-hmm. So it's hard for me to, I don't know, it's hard for me to feel like too bad, because this is sort of like I don't know, it's been a long time coming. Maybe I've just been prepared for it. But it sucks. I mean, it sucks for Baylor fans, right? Like, BYU's going to be on the raw end of that deal at some point. Like, it's great. Rob Wright comes to BYU. That's fantastic. I don't know, was there tampering or not? Tampering doesn't even exist anymore. So even if there was tampering, like, okay. Like, I don't really know what that means in anymore. They don't even sign national letters of intent anymore, Jake. I mean, it's entirely different than it used to be. So, you know, to me, I don't really need to get into that to try to deny it or confirm it, because it just doesn't exist. Look around. Like, anybody with eyes can see that is not a rule that matters anymore. But it sucks. And yeah, it's great for BYU with Rob Wright. Anytime you land 5 stars, I'm with you. I think he fits this offense really, really well. So that's great. BYU is going to be on the raw end of one of these deals at some point. It's just the way that this game works. And until there's something that changes, yeah, this is just the nature of college athletics.
This episode is brought to you by Aptiv. Aptiv believes that every home should be enjoyed. They tailor their pest control treatment plans to target pests when and where they're most active. Plus, if you see pest activity between treatments, Aptiv will return to take care of the problem at no additional cost. It's their way of making sure every customer is satisfied and every pest is controlled. If pests stay away, Aptiv is why. Visit goaptiv.com/loyal Cougars or call 844-966-4787. Mention this promotion to get your initial treatment for just $29. That's goaptiv.com/loyal Cougars or call 844-966-4787. Terms and conditions apply. Get home field advantage with Aptiv. Looking to get your brand in front of BYU's most engaged fans? The Loyal Cougars podcast and Cougar Board are your perfect match. Cougar Board is the largest online community of BYU fans with thousands of posts every day. The Loyal Cougars podcast is the official podcast of Cougar Board, and we have sponsorship opportunities available for both the podcast and the site. Contact us at sponsorships@loyalcougars.com, and we'll help your message hit home with the Cougar faithful. Again, that's sponsorships@loyalcougars.com. And maybe I need someone to just define what tampering in the NCAA means, because I know tampering exists in the NBA, right? Like, there's actually like contractual obligations that enforce tampering or enforce tampering rules.
Yeah.
I don't know what the governing body like the NCAA says about tampering, if it's officially defined. What I will say about NIL is that it feels like it, you know, originally the intent of NIL, literally in the name, image, and likeness, right? You get paid for your name, for your image, and for your likeness. This is for athletes who are going to like conventions or going to meet and greets and signing footballs or signing whatever and not getting paid for them. Those athletes wanted to get paid, right? It makes sense. Or an athlete on NCAA College Football 2014, right? The last year that it came out. Players wanted to get paid for not just their name, because the NCAA, you know, EA Sports took their name off the jersey, and they thought, well, that eliminates your name. Like, you can't sue us for that. It was still their likeness. And so, like, to me, that was the root of NIL, was players got paid for their image, name, and likeness to be used for commercial purposes, and to profit from those. And I feel like it's become more of like a pay to play, which I think was very directly not supposed to be the result. I think the NCAA said this is not a pay to play system or a pay to play process. And it feels like it's becoming that. And, they can kind of hide behind this facade of, they're getting paid through these collectives, and the collectives are using their name, image, and likeness for whatever reason. My wife bought me a Richie Saunders shirt from, I think Coug Connect, or maybe the Royal Blue Connect collective. I don't know, one of the two. And, that makes sense. Like Richie's probably, he better be getting a profit from the proceeds of that sale. But when you bring in like an AJ DeBanza or a Rob Wright or whoever, or even when you re-sign a Boscovich for $1 million or whatever, at what point are we using their name, image, and likeness versus at what point are we paying them to play?
Yeah.
And I think that line probably needs to be drawn at some point. Now, I'm not complaining, right? As you said, BYU is benefiting from NIL probably more than any other school in terms of where they were versus where they are today.
Yeah.
NIL, and I'm not going to, I think it's probably ignorant to say it's just NIL. It's just, big boosters putting a ton of money, pumping a ton of money into these collectives. That's probably a big part of it. But I do think that Kevin Young's playing a big part of this as well, bringing in the staff that he's bringing in, his experience in the NBA, his pitches to get players ready for the NBA. AJ DeBanza has said himself, like that's the biggest reason why he's coming to BYU. Granted, yes, money played a role. Money got BYU on the table. But I think we're kind of diminishing Kevin Young's role in recruiting when we talk just about NIL and bringing these players in. So that said, the other big thing that was kind of said last week, there was a bit of a contradiction, and I know you're aware of this. Clark Gilbert, who's a representative of the church, I think of BYU, church education commissioner. So he's over the church education system. He said he expects BYU to engage in NIL competitively, but he said, quote, he never wants BYU to be the highest bidder, or BYU's never the highest bidder. And the problem with that is BYU booster, Paul Lillenquist, said probably weeks before that, quote, you're not going to outbid us being BYU. So you've got two, very contradicting statements. And I guess my question to you is, can both be true? And if not, like, which one do you think is more true?
I think if we really get into semantics, you could probably say that both are true. I mean, I think you could probably say there's, direct NIL packages from BYU maybe wasn't as competitive as a direct NIL package put together by the Alabama basketball staff for AJ DeBanza. That's probably true. There's a whole lot of other boosters and a lot of other side deals and a lot of other things that happen in that recruiting space that isn't maybe technically from BYU, but rather BYU affiliates that I would be really, really hard pressed to believe that BYU is not among the highest bidders, or at least at some point in the process has been the highest bidder. Maybe everybody else catches up and maybe they up the ante after that. But I think BYU definitely sets the tone in a lot of these recruiting battles. And I think that's fair to say, I mean, across multiple sports. I mean, even getting down into like girls basketball and things like that. I think that the numbers are very different, but I think BYU sets the tone in a lot of these discussions. They come out with their offers early on. They want to get on the table, to your point, Jake. And then, from there, everything else that BYU does is what wins, right? But you've got to get your hat on the table to begin with. And I think that's where NIL has benefited BYU. The thing that when I saw this quote from Clark Gilbert, I didn't have a problem with it. I was very not surprised that that's what BYU and representatives of BYU and the church, that's the narrative they want out there. I think that's great. Like I say, I don't have a problem with it. I do wonder, like we talked about in this space where there is no verifiable information, right? Like these contracts aren't public. Nobody's. Yeah, I think by putting your stick in the ground and saying we are not something and making a very definitive statement. And this goes to the other way too, as well as saying we will never be outbid, right? I think when you go and you make this definitive statement in this very ambiguous world, you are inviting a whole lot of criticism to come your way, whether you're telling the truth or not. I wish that the statement would have been something like, we have a really active fan base. We have a really passionate alumni base. We encourage any and all NIL activities as permitted by the NCAA and the law. I think that says like, hey, look, we're compliant. We're doing what we're supposed to do. We're not breaking the rules. And it leaves everything else up for interpretation. That was my only like nitpick there. Just like the PR side of me is like, by saying we are not going to be the highest bidder ever, you've pigeonholed yourself to either now you're a hypocrite if you ever are the highest bidder, or you're kind of setting yourself up for failure by never playing the highest bidder game. Maybe you need to for Ryder Lyons down the road, right? Yeah. So I didn't love the definitive nature of that statement, and I didn't love that this is such a gray world right now, the whole NIL space, especially in college basketball, where parents and agents and things like that, they're going to use BYU's name because of the reputation. You sign AJ DeBanza, you're going to have this reputation that you play big. So yeah, if you're a kid from UC San Diego and you hit the transfer portal, you're going to leak that BYU's interested because that's going to drive your value up. And nobody from BYU can ever like raise their hand and be like, we don't know who he is. We've never called him. Like, you can just say whatever you want. So definitive statements in that kind of environment is really tough for me.
I feel like that's always happened, right? With high school kids, you have to just take their word for it. And this is before NIL. If they were saying like, yeah, Ohio State's for sure recruiting me, like, what are you going to say? Like, oh, show me the letter or whatever. Right. Like, I guess there's ways to prove it, but you're right. I mean, it's never going to be public because, especially at BYU, because it's a private institution, but even at public institutions, the collectives are private. And so that information never gets out. I do want to, because I think there's some context behind Clark Gilbert's quote. It's part of a larger story. And the tweet that he actually put out said, principles for BYU athletics. He said, number one, and this is important. Number one, no church funding, no debt. I think that's
huge.
Probably more important than the second point, which was that they wanted to engage in NIL competitively, but never the highest bidder. I think people are focusing too much on that part. His whole point is like, we want to clarify, like, these funds are not coming from the church.
Right.
This is strictly from BYU athletics. It's coming from donors, and the principle, the standard that they need to abide by is that they cannot go into debt. Right. So they can't be paying players $20 million when their budget is 15 or whatever. I think it's 20. I think it's actually like 22. But if they pay one player $20 million or whatever, $15 million, then like they're running short on their budget and they cannot go into debt. Like, that's the rule. That's the standard for the university. And then the third point was focus on the mission, coaching, and BYU environment. He says, this is a place that is different. It is special, and people are finding that out. And so, I think to take one quote out of this, never the highest bidder, and blow that specific thing out of proportion, I do also think that, like you said, I agree that probably both are wrong. Clark Gilbert and Lillenquist, in the sense that, like, that's not true. Like, some teams will outbid BYU, and that's because BYU probably doesn't value players as much as other teams. Mm-hmm. And I think that kind of goes back to Clark Gilbert's quote, which was, you'll never be BYU's never going to be the highest bidder. If I'm going to read between the lines here, I think he's either kind of misspoken, and probably never is the wrong word. Like, you never want to have extremes, right? Just like Lillenquist said, you're not going to be outbid us. Like, sometimes people will. I think sometimes BYU will be the highest bidder. But I think the point of it was that he doesn't want BYU to just get into bidding wars.
Yeah, not
for
just
players,
selling
right?
cash, right? Yeah.
Exactly. I think that the approach should be, and this is probably the approach that Kevin Young has, that he'll go to a player and he'll say, this is what we think you're worth. Mm-hmm. And essentially, like, this is the offer that you have. If you like it, great. If not, great. Like, we'll move on. I think Tanner Toolson's kind of dealing with that right now as he's transferred from UVU. I know BYU has, he visited BYU. I know Gonzaga's on the table. I know Iowa's on the table. I think Gonzaga's offering him 7 figures.
Yeah.
I don't know if BYU is, because BYU has a starting point guard. They already have a starting five, essentially. I don't know if Tanner Toolson would break the starting five. And so like they probably value him less than maybe like an Iowa or even like a Gonzaga. And so maybe those teams are offering him more money. And that's not to say BYU is getting into a bidding war with them. But they're just telling him like, this is your value. Like we're willing to pay you this much. And if it happens to be more than anyone else, like that's great, but it wasn't a bidding war, right? Like, I think that's kind of the approach and the intent of what Clark Gilbert was saying.
I agree with that. And I think that is the right approach. I think that's what you have to do. If you're just selling cash, right, you're not focused on anything else. And this is your show, Jake. I don't mean to transition, but like if you're just selling money, you look at what's happening at the Tennessee football program. That's what your entire culture becomes about. Everybody wants more money all the time. No matter how much money you make, you always want more. You always think you're more valuable. And if that's your value prop to all of these players is money and money alone, then it's really easy for them to be like, I'm not getting mine. I need more. And that's what happened. So I agree that probably was the intent of what Clark Gilbert was saying. I don't love the quote. I just don't. I don't love any of those definitive statements. And like I say, I don't like Lillenquist's statement either of you'll never be the highest bidder. This world is so ambiguous. Everybody can make whatever claim they want. I think that is what Greg Wrubell and Spencer Linton, when they go public on social media, that's really what they were trying to say is, I don't think I ever actually saw either one of them. Maybe I'm wrong. I don't think either one of them even refuted the numbers necessarily, but really just came out and were like, how does this just become accepted as fact? Like there's no verified information. A team reporter says something and we're just running with it. That's crazy. Yeah. And I think that's what's happened.
I don't even think it was like an official team report. I think it was like
not
to diminish these guys, right? Because they're important too, but kind of like a fan blogger. Like it was,
I think you're right.
I think it was like a credentialed media member. Okay. So you mentioned Nico Yamaleava, right? Did I say his name right? Yamaleava.
I think so. Yamaleava. Yeah.
Yamaleava. And by the way, you're way better at segues than I am. So that was phenomenal. We're going to move on to football now. Because his situation is incredibly interesting. And we kind of already talked about it with Rob Wright and with, we've been talking about this whole episode with NIL, but do you anticipate that being a thing in college athletics where a player decides he wants to hold out? By the way, I read kind of a backstory into what had actually happened. It sounds like his dad and his agent really kind of not went behind his back, but made, they're like his decision maker. They're like his manager per se.
Yeah.
And it sounds like they're the ones that were demanding more money. And it really ticked off Tennessee and their head coach. But it was already out there. And I think then the story broke. I think On3 broke it. And at that point, like the dad or the agent kind of went rogue at that point. And he was like, basically like, he's not going to play for you unless you pay him this money. And, however much of this you want to believe, this is just what's in the story, but they kind of were pigeonholed into this approach of we're going to hold out until you pay us, because that's what the agent had relayed to the team. And that's what the coach had, essentially expected. And so he was already like super upset at the situation. And so Yamaleava was already in hot water. But that said, like, I think it's crazy to think that this is now a reality of NIL, that players are sitting out. And so like, is that something you expect to see moving forward with other teams? Yeah. But the other thing is like, who would want a player like that at this point, right? Like, I know he's, probably going to go to another SEC or another, P5 school or P4 school. But like, I feel like that damages your reputation as a player, right?
So it definitely does. I mean, in terms of reputation, absolutely. But like, look, Deshaun Watson still signed a max contract, right? Like, and he got an all guaranteed deal, and everyone in Cleveland knew what was going on. At some point, teams that think they're a piece away will say, fine, I don't care. Give me your baggage. We want to win. And that's really kind of a flaw in roster construction and the system, because I think what you say is correct. It should be a big problem. It should be a showstopper for a lot of teams. It's not going to be. I mean, he's still going to find his way to be at UCLA or Washington or some big time program. That's still going to happen. And so, yeah, I mean, and if it does, when it does, I think really all that really does for him, for Nico in the short term, is if he doesn't play well. I mean, let's say he was an average quarterback at Tennessee and he plays 4 full years there. He's got enough natural talent that the NFL probably still takes a flyer. But if he goes to a second school and he's average at 2 schools now and he's got all this baggage, maybe he isn't that day 3 pick. So I think it just kind of eliminates his safety net a little bit. But if he goes and balls out, he's going to get paid in college and then he'll get paid again in the NFL, because these football coaches they're paid to win. And if he can help teams do that, that's what they'll pay for.
Yeah. See, but I think in the NFL, it's a little more acceptable, right? Like, I think it's become, obviously, like, players, they know they're getting paid and they know they have contracts. They know they have salary caps. They know they can get traded. There's free agency. Like, it's very much structured around pay. In college, they're still kind of navigating it, right? Like, NIL is still this new thing, and we don't have trading. We don't have salary caps that I know of, right? I don't know if teams have their own, but as of, before last week, we didn't have players holding out.
So you know what? What's crazy about that is so my guy Josh Pate over at CBS Sports, I mean, he released his take on this. He'd heard about this for several months now, of Nico and his team, his camp, kind of playing these games. And he says there's a handful of Tennessee players that were ready to hold out of the playoff game and say, hey, give us a new deal now. And so if I think more and more about this, look, Nico's going to get criticized, and he probably deserves it. Part of this player and power movement, right? Like, cool, you've got all the power, but you have to accept the criticism. If you're going to take millions of dollars and hold these big giant schools hostage, you're going to have to be, accepting of that criticism when it's warranted. And this is warranted. Whether, Nico's fully within his rights to do what he's done, but like, so was Josh at Stanford, right? When Scranton and Stanford were merging branches and Josh leveraged that into a new job at Staples, Dunder Mifflin was still really, really upset. And I think that that's what's happened with Nico, fully within his rights, but certainly deserving of the criticism. I think the bigger problem, and you touched on it already, it's these agents. It's agents and players. And everyone looks at collective bargaining, right? And unions and all of these things. And maybe that helps if that all trickles down into the college level. Maybe that helps. Maybe that's a big part of the solution. I think it's professionalism among the agents, right? Like, to be an agent in the NFL, to actually represent and have any power with negotiations and contracts. Well, you got to have a law degree. You got to be credentialed. The NFLPA has to say, yes, you're a certified agent and you can you are authorized to act on behalf of all of our players.
Yeah.
All of that exists. What does it take to become an agent in the NIL space? Nothing at all. If I have a neighbor who's a really big time college football recruit, I can go to his parents and be like, hey guys, like, I'll only take 20%. The other guy wants to take 25. I can do it. Whether I can or can't doesn't matter. And you get these agents, these parents, you get, it's ugly. So how much do I believe, Josh Pate's report that there were players willing to sit out the bowl game? 100%. I really do. I think that is a lot more common than people realize. Do I think this is going to become more common? Do I think that maybe it was parents, maybe it was agents, whatever it was, somebody went rogue and Nico really didn't have a whole lot of say? Yeah, I think that that's probably pretty true as well. I've covered this recruiting space for a long time, and I don't represent BYU in any way, shape, or form. I hold no power whatsoever to getting a player onto the field at BYU. And the things that I've heard from parents and from representatives of players about, like, hey, Jeff, if you can do this for me, I can do X. I can't do anything, but I've been hearing that for years, and now it's legal. Now it's okay. And now I can actually say that I'm an agent and I get a cut and I'm invested in this. It's ugly, and it's a whole lot more ugly than I think anybody realizes. And I don't think that the players have nearly the voice that they think they do. I think they have the opportunity to have that voice, but I think instead of now it's Kyle Whittingham and Nick Saban who are calling all of the shots. It's Agent X and whomever else is in their camp that are calling all of the shots. most of the time these 18, 19-year-old guys, they just want to play ball. They want to,
Yeah.
hang out with their friends and play ball. And if they get paid a lot in the process, fantastic. But there's not really very many, even, 16, 17-year-olds in high school. I think Nico's a sophomore in college. Like, is there really that many 19, 20-year-old guys that understand the lifetime value of $4 million versus $6 million? Like, I don't think so. You can buy some pretty dope cars with $4 million. And I think that's what drives a lot of it, right? We've all been 20 and you don't really think long-term, but who does think long-term, or at least thinks immediate and my long-term, is a bunch of agents that are seeing, hey, I can get a ton of money and I know the lifetime value of this money. Let's capitalize while we can. That's, I think, what we're seeing a lot of. And I think Nico, I think he opened up Pandora's box, but this is going to be a lot more common. The first guy to opt out of a bowl game was like kind of criticized. Now we just accept it every year. I think you're going to see a lot more of this.
Yeah, and I would add to agents' parents in some cases as well, especially in Nico's case. So that said, and as we've kind of transitioned from basketball to football season, there's a pretty noticeable difference in terms of quality of recruit, and we'll talk about Brock Harris in just a second. But BYU basketball clearly is bringing in a top 10 recruiting class, and there's no denying that football is not there yet. I think football is like top 50, maybe top 40 with Brock Harris. Why do you see such a discrepancy, or is it just because like we haven't given football enough time? Does football take just more time to kind of develop their players and start recruiting?
It's different. I think that's the most important thing for people to understand is it's different. Like, you go get AJ DeBanza and you're going to be in the top 10, really, no matter what else you do, right? If you can land the top dog in a basketball class where teams are signing 2 or 3 players and then maybe 1 or 2 transfers, yeah, I mean, you're going to be towards the top. And then you couple it with some of the other things that BYU basketball has done. Great. So I think you're always going to see that discrepancy. As long as BYU basketball is recruiting at that level, they're going to be in the top 10, 15 teams every single year. And BYU football is just not going to get there because you're signing 30 players in a class. So signing one Ryder Lyons helps. I mean, you want it, right? There's no debating that. But the teams that are in the top 10 are signing 10 of the top 50 players. You know what I mean? Like, they're signing a lot of top dogs. Will BYU football ever get there? I don't know. I don't think so. I think it's so different because kind of really some of the stuff we had to talk about with Clark Gilbert and all of that NIL discussion, that's part of it. But, you can convince anybody to come to BYU, get paid top dollar, have NBA development, come and live the BYU life for 8 to 9 months. And then you're going to go and you're going to hit the NBA. And if you don't develop the way that you thought you would, and you're not an NBA player, you're Cannon Catchings and you still have a ton of talent and you can go find another high level college somewhere else. You can pitch one and done in basketball. You can't do that in football. You've got to convince somebody to come and commit to 3 years worth at minimum, right? I mean, if Brock Harris comes and hits every single development checkpoint and is the best tight end in the country, he's still got 3 years at BYU. No ifs, ands, or buts about it if he joins right away, right? So it's different, and that is a tougher sell. And then the other thing, we were talking about it a little bit before the show, like as fun as basketball has been for everybody, I look at my page views and clicks, and it's still football, right? Football is still king. That same kind of mindset is how boosters work too. So BYU basketball might be willing to spend, call it $100 million. I have no idea what the number is. They might be willing to spend a lot. And maybe they're one of 4 or 5 or maybe 10 teams willing to spend that much. Football, there's 40 teams willing to spend that much. I mean, their boosters are willing to spend when it comes to football. You get down south. I saw a graphic. It was on a news station that the average salary of the starting lineups in the Big 10, ACC, and Big 12 was between $3 and $5 million. And then the average starting salary among everybody, right? Not individually, but the collective salary for your starters in the SEC was $15 million, $14.6 million. There's just a different mindset with a lot of these teams and a lot of these booster clubs in football, that they are willing to spend whatever it takes to win in football. So it's just a lot more competitive. So you combine those things, and that makes it really tough, I think, for BYU to get to those levels, those top 5, 10 levels like basketball is in. But I also don't think Kalani wants that, right? Like Kalani wants his players, and I talked about it a ton throughout the season. Kalani's found a competitive advantage, and that is cohesiveness and culture and camaraderie in a locker room. All of that stuff kind of used to be table stakes, but in the NIL era, there's so many kids that are going to these schools for money that there is no culture, there is no buy-in. They just want money. And it's tough to convince somebody to go out there and fight for that extra 3 yards to pick up a first down if their only driver is the money that they already got. But if you have a culture where you're playing for the guy next to you and you're representing something bigger than yourself and you're really truly bought into that, then you'll go fight for that extra yard, right? Like you'll go get that first down. You'll be Tyler Algier that runs down to knock out the ball on a pick six. Like you'll make those extra plays, and that becomes a competitive advantage. Used to be table stakes, now it's unique. And BYU, I think that Kalani's figured that out, that they can win games with culture. They've got to have talent, right? They've got to have all these other things. All that stuff is still critical. But all of a sudden, culture becomes a weapon that matters, that's unique, and that not every team has. And I think fewer and fewer teams have it now in the NIL era. I don't think that Kalani, even if he could, I don't think they can, but even if they could spend like that and recruit at that top 10 level, I don't know that Kalani would do it. I think he'd still recruit BYU guys. He would expand that umbrella, and he would make sure he doesn't miss on BYU guys. But I don't know that he's ever just going to start like, hey, here's the top 25 guys. Let's go get all of them. I don't think he'd do it.
That's fair. That makes a lot of sense. That's actually very Kalani of him. And I don't mean that in a bad way. Like he is very much a culture guy. Like Lavelle was a culture guy.
Yeah.
And so I think Kalani's just trying to extend that culture. Now, obviously, we've talked about Brock Harris, probably one of the biggest gets so far in. Now he's not going to play for 2 years, so technically 2 years, 2027 recruiting class. But what do you see out of Brock? And it seems like BYU is putting a lot of emphasis on tight ends. And granted, we don't know what the roster is going to look like in 2 years. There's 9 tight ends on the current roster. They just signed a tight end with Carson Ryan, Ty Ghosh, and then Brock Harris, obviously committed. Do you think Kalani's putting more of an emphasis on tight ends? And I say that because BYU has, they've had tight ends, Dallin Holker, Rex, like they've had great tight ends. But when you look at like a Utah where they've had this pipeline of tight ends and tight ends that have made it into the NFL, do you see Kalani kind of trying to, or even A-Rod, right, the offensive coordinator, do you think they're trying to kind of replicate that approach of let's get our tight ends involved and not just in the run game?
I'm pulling up the roster now because I don't think that I definitely know Utah doesn't have anything to do with it or anything like that, right? But like I think that BYU would like to use the tight end more. I think that if we get really football-y and into the X's and O's of it, I think that Chase Roberts did a lot of those tight end things last year, even as a wide receiver, because BYU just didn't have the talent to really move the needle from the tight end spot. And I think that they want to let Chase Roberts do wide receiver things, so they've got to find tight ends to do that. But as far as the emphasis goes, if I look at the roster, Carson Ryan's a dude. I think we're going to see a lot of Carson Ryan this season. He's very, very good. He's got 1 year left, and then he's gone. And aside from that, looking at the roster, Ethan Erickson's played a little bit, mostly as a blocker, but I think even he's a senior, so he's only got 1 year left. And then it's a bunch of either freshmen, unproven talent, or walk-ons. So BYU is going to emphasize the tight end spot over the next couple of recruiting classes because they have to. They don't have bodies on the roster next year. I think you could see as many as 5 tight ends signed in this class because you've got missionaries like Brock Harris. Ty Ghosh is also going to go on a mission. So big gets, beat out a lot of schools, doesn't really help you next year. They still got to go out. They're going to try to, land a Taimani Purcell. That's another big time player. A Kekua Aumua is another big time player. I think you're going to see a continued emphasis on the tight end. One, because they want it. They do want to elevate that position. When A-Rod has had tight ends that are, how do I say this delicately? But when A-Rod has had tight ends that are worth getting the ball to and emphasizing in the offense, he's tried. And we look at, Dallin Holker, and everyone's like, well, Holker left. Well, Holker wanted crazy volumes, but when he left, he was second on the team in targets, only behind Puka, and he had just led BYU in targets in that Oregon game, the last game that he played. So his usage was going up. He just wanted otherworldly usage like he got at Colorado State. And as long as Puka was on the roster, that was never going to happen, right? So he made his own decision, and that's great. But I think we saw A-Rod try to get the ball to the tight end. He tried to use Isaac Rex and did quite a bit until Isaac Rex got hurt and then became, he was a different player after that injury. And since then, he hasn't had that guy that commands targets. I think that's what they're trying to go and get is that guy that will do that. And they also, they got a really big need to go and get tight ends for next year's roster.
Yeah, and I agree. My hot take, and I said this a few weeks ago, pretty much right after they signed Carson Ryan, I said Carson Ryan could lead the team in receptions next year.
Yeah, I think he could. He's really good. I think it's easy to look at his stats at UCLA and Utah and say he's not that good. He's really good. At UCLA, he played as a true freshman, kind of played an H-back role, but he was a true freshman and made an impact and found his way into the starting lineup before he got hurt. And last year at Utah, he was among 6 tight ends that rotated, and he didn't put up ungodly numbers, but he put up fine numbers being one of 6. So I think Carson Ryan, where he's really like one of 1 right now, as long as he is healthy, he's going to put up monster numbers this season.
Well, and he's a great blocking tight end too, which is going to keep him on the field in the run game. And I think that's important. Even as a receiving tight end, if you can block and stay on the field, that's only going to increase your volume. So last thing, and I appreciate you hopping on for so long. Usually our shows are like 30 to 45 minutes. We've gone on 50 minutes. The biggest kind of storyline I think still left in the offseason is what's going to happen with Ryder Lyons.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Brock Harris's decision affects Ryder Lyons' decision at all. Where do you put Ryder's chances of, because it seems like USC is probably the favorite, at least in terms of like national perception. But where do you put your odds?
Yeah, I think that BYU, I really don't think there is a favorite at this point. Actually, I'm with you. I think USC was the favorite. I think USC has fallen off a little bit. I actually look at Oregon, Michigan, and he was just at Ohio State this past weekend. Those are probably the biggest competition for BYU.
Yeah.
Whether you want to say it's a 3-way race or a 4-way race, BYU is one of those 3 or 4. I feel very confident in saying BYU is not in second place, but they might be in a 3-way tie for first, but they're not behind anybody right now in the Ryder Lyons sweepstakes. They're absolutely in the mix. There's been a lot of discussion about, package deals. Does Brock Harris, does he help pull Ryder? Yeah, I'm sure he helps play a role in you've got to have elite talent, and Ryder Lyons can look and see, guys like McKay Madsen and guys like Brock Harris and say that is elite talent that I could play with at BYU. But also, don't make the mistake of thinking that, Brock, they want to play together. It's going to happen. Like his brothers at USC, they probably want to play together too. His best friend is at Ole Miss. They probably want to play together too. And 2 of his offensive linemen just committed to USC as well. So maybe he wants to play with those guys. It's tough for me to say that any one of those things matters more than the other. Like when you get to that level of Ryder Lyons, 5-star quarterback, you've got friends and relationships everywhere. So I don't know that it is a deal breaker for by any stretch of the imagination, but it's kind of a prerequisite that if you don't have players like that, he's not going to consider you. BYU checks that box now.
So is it safe to say we're not going to get a crystal ball?
No, not right now. Not right now, but maybe one day I'll change my tune for Ryder Lyons. Maybe I'll bring it back.
We got to get your first crystal ball prediction in 5 years, you said?
Yeah, something like that.
We got to get it. We got to get it back. Jeff Hansen's crystal ball predictions are coming back. Okay, Jeff, thanks for joining again. I really appreciate it. You are the go-to for me for recruiting information for BYU football. And so I appreciate you hopping on. If you like what you hear from Jeff, I'm sure you already follow him on social media. You probably already listen to his podcast, and you go to CougarSportsInsider.com. But if you don't, head to one of those channels, give Jeff some love, and tell him we appreciate him hopping on. Thanks, Jeff, for joining us. This is the Loyal Cougars podcast. I'm your host, Jake Edmonds, again with Jeff Hansen. We'll see you next week.